So hello again, and this is Shariff Abdullah, and we're talking about tonight experiencing our values. And what we're doing is looking at the concept of values as a whole, then the concept of our very specific values, what our personal values may be. I make a suggestion that we have some universal values, some common values, let's say. And these are the values that will actually get us to a new society, to a world that works for all. This is the third of the critical contexts. And, you know, it's unfortunate that we haven't had the continuity between each one of them. In fact, I think Delaney and I are the only ones that have been continuous. Oh, and maybe Robin also have been continuous for all three of them. The first one was the 12 Global Challenges. If you don't know what we are up against, then how in the world can you deal with it? The second one was looking at vision and what vision is and how vision has to be more than just a good idea, and what our vision is of creating a world that works for all. And now we're into experiencing our values, and the values that are key to our survival on this planet. But more important than that, how do we become what all of our mystics call true human beings? Not just thinking about this in terms of what somebody else's values ought to be. Everybody wants to tell Donald Trump what his values ought to be. But more than that, it has to be what is the thing that's moving you, okay? And I'm going to be introducing you to a new word, okay? And that word is praxis. Praxis is more than just saying something is your practice, okay? I can practice the flute, and the reason I chuckle is that if you are in the other room back there, you would see how many flutes I have, which is a lot, and you see how many of them are gathering dust right now. Okay, so I have a practice, but I'm not practicing it. But praxis is something more than that. Praxis is your practice that is aligned with your values, with your value structure, how you intend to be on this planet, okay? Which means that this is really, really important stuff, and we should approach it that way. One thing I want to say before we get into some content here is I'm suffering from low bandwidth right now. This is the disease of the 21st century. So if I get a little jumpy, bear with me. It's probably not your computer. It's probably mine. Okay, so let's get started here And let me start by sharing my screen with you. Okay, and then let's pull you over here. So when we start, we're going to be looking first at some questions of transformative values throughout time. And oh my goodness, I don't know if my shirt looks psychedelic to you on a small screen. It's definitely looking that way to me. Believe me, it's not moving around on me. Since there have been human beings on this planet, we've had a sense of value, and those values have been over time reduced or codified into some families. I'm going to talk about a few of these families. And before I do, I want everyone to know, I say this on almost every video, when I talk about values, when I talk about spirit and spirituality, when I talk about wisdom, I am not talking about religion, okay? Religion, whether you have one or whether you don't have one, is a matter of your preference. I don't think that that is anything that is going to either get us to or retard us from creating a world that works for all. The thing that will, though, is our experience of our values and how we act out those values in the world. And so spirit and wisdom and transcendence is here. Religion is here. They may or may not mix. I'm not talking about this part over here. I'm talking about this part over here. Okay. So I want to start with what I call the 4 pillars. These are the 4 value structures that have impacted my life. Now, you may have 4 different value structures. You may have 6, you may have 10, you may have 0. Okay, so you can borrow 4 of mine. So I just want to walk us through this so that you can understand how these things impact how we live on this planet. Okay, so the first one is the first pillar that impacts my life is the wisdom around Taoism. I'm assuming that a number of you are already familiar with Taoism, the Tao Te Ching, and I'm going to, but of my 4 pillars, this is probably the one that is least understood, at least in the West. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. That was the Tao Te Ching. I'm sure everybody just wrote that down real quick. The Tao part, the Tao means the way. The Tao is the transcendent way of ultimate reality. This is the transcendent way that is more than all the stuff that we see out of our windows, but has to do with the ultimate reality of how we're here. The Tao, therefore, is unnameable, it's ungraspable, it's ineffable. It can't be effed. That's what ineffable means. And it can only be alluded to. So Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching talks a lot about metaphor, talks in metaphor, talks a lot about roundabout ways of looking at what this thing that cannot be directly named. In fact, I think the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching is the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. Okay, although, like I said, according to my monitor, my shirt looks like it's trying to become part of ultimate reality right now. So the Tao is the observable way the universe works. when we see galaxies swirling in the cosmos, and then when you see water swirling in your sink, it does it the same way. So there's some principle between a galaxy millions of light years away and the water in your sink. It's the rhythm. It's the driving power behind all of nature. It's the principle that orders us. Our physicists try to understand the universe through mathematics. Mathematics is a really great help in understanding our physical reality. And then when you get to a certain point, it holds you back because it's not the Tao. The Tao that can be mathematically proved is not the Tao. So not only do galaxies do this, and not only does the water in your sink do this, but human beings do this. So you know when your life is part of the flow and harmony of the universe, and you also know when you are butting heads up against everything. And those are the times when I have to go back and get into my meditative flow of the universe. So the Tao looks at a number of different principles. From our Western view, it looks as though these principles are opposing each other, okay? But they're really this complementary swirl of energies and relationships. So this dynamic opposition is the thing that creates the entire universe. And so the Der part of Tao Te Ching is either looked at as either virtue or power. You may want to call it the energy of the universe, okay, or the integrity of the universe, or the universal goodness, the fact that the universe is good, okay? It's like, you know, I could say more, but I don't have time. So when you are in that flow, when you're in the Tao, it's probably because you are imbued with the Der. You've got the energy, the power, the flow going through you. So let's look at this dynamic relationship for a bit. You were familiar with the Taoist symbol, the yin and yang, where the black moves into the white moves into the black. Each one has a spot that says each one is part of the complementarity of the other. So these are sets of dualities that try to reach some kind of dynamic balance. The one I want to point out to you is the first one. The Tao is usually referred to, and the yin is referred to as a female principle, yang is referred to as a male principle. I think that this is a problem, okay? And I think the problem is we're so used to thinking about males and females in this society that we've created, in this highly dysfunctional society. We can't seem to get the rhythm of this flow, of recognizing that these are two power principles. These power principles are equal, although they're very different from each other. So the field, let's take the field of gravity. You're sitting in your seat right now because there's a very powerful field that we're in. It's almost impossible for us to break this field. What goes up is going to come down eventually. The point power is also powerful. It's direction, it's force, and so when the field and the point are in balance with each other, things can happen. And my definition on this is think about your car. Think if the spark plugs are not in your car is not going to move. Those are the points. If there's not a field, if there's not a tank of gasoline or a charged battery, if the field isn't present, the car's not going to move. So you need both of these things working in dynamic harmony with each other in order for this to be useful. Okay. So I want to, so this is a quote from Houston Smith, a man who passed away a few years ago and was one of the few living mentors that I had before he passed. And Houston says, and he wrote the book, The World's Religions. So if you studied the world's religions in college, you read his book. 25 million copies in print. He also wrote smaller books on each of the world's religions. And from the introduction to his book on the Tao Te Ching, this is what Houston said. It is close at hand, stands indeed at our very side, yet is intangible, a thing that by reaching for cannot be got. Remote, it seems, as the furthest limit of the infinite, yet it is not far off. Every day we use its power, for the way of the vital spirit fills our whole frames, yet one cannot keep track of it. It goes, yet it has not departed. It comes, yet it's not here. It is muted, so takes no note that can be heard. Yet of a sudden we find that it is there in the mind. It is dim and dark. It's showing no outward form. Yet in a great stream it flowed into us at birth. So these are, again, I hope you can get the paradoxical nature of it. If you get to the point of saying, oh yeah, I understand the Tao now, you blew it. Okay, so you don't understand. We can only get close to approximating it. So one of my pillars of my work are the values of Taoism. Am I a practicing Taoist? No, I'm not. I wouldn't even know how to do that. But these principles I can hold, the praxis I can hold it in my meditation, I can hold it in how I'm talking to people, I can hold it in understanding what my principle is and understanding how I can develop all the other principles within me. So my second pillar is Buddhism. And the Buddhism has four basic, values or ideas that motivate it. And these are called the Four Noble Truths. The truth about suffering, everything is in suffering. The truth about the origin of suffering. The origin of suffering is inside of you. It's not outside of you. I can bang my hand and my hand will be in pain. The problem is not in the nerve cells in my hand. The problem is in my mind and how I think about this. A quick example. Nobody, I shouldn't say that. No, I was about to say nobody likes taking needles, but there are people who I'm sure who like taking needles. But most of us don't like or enjoy taking needles, okay? I don't particularly like it, but if I have to do that, I do it and I don't experience suffering because I tell myself, this is a physical sensation. It will be over in a second. It's not pleasant. I can go through it. It's not a big deal. I know people, though, that need to be sedated before they can take a needle. They freak themselves out, and all that freak out is happening right up here and in their hearts. So the origin of suffering is inside of you. You can cease that suffering by ceasing your attachment to whatever your status quo is. And there's a path that gets you to stopping that suffering, stopping the suffering in the world, in yourself, and stopping the suffering in the world for other people. And that path is called the Eightfold Path, and there it is. The Eightfold Path is what I would refer to as Buddhist praxis. Okay, this is the stuff that activates your, if you call yourself a Buddhist. Right view, that means a correct way of seeing the world. Right now in this country, that is something that is definitely lacking in our lives. And I'm talking about everybody's life. Right resolve, having the right, the correct mindfulness, the correct, like, I'm going to go about doing this. I would say, for example, in our context, right resolve is, I will create a world that works for all beings. That's my job. That's what I intend to do. Right speech, to be able to say the right words the right way that will be healing, that will be calming, etc. We've got plenty of experience, especially nowadays, with wrong speech. I want to pause for a second, and those of you who are not in the Portland area, you may not know that there is a rally of the ultra right-wingers coming to Portland, basically to challenge the ultra left-wingers of the Antifa. And they're going to go into downtown Portland, and they're going to be beating the crap out of each other and anybody else who happens to be around. And this is probably the exact example of a lack of right view, a lack of right resolve, a lack of right speech. And this problem is shared on both sides. There has to be a third way. We, the 7 or 8 of us on this call, and then the other 10 or 12 that are going to be coming in from on the recording, we represent that right view. We represent the right resolve. We represent the right speech. And it's time for us to get our rear ends in gear. And I'll say more about that as we go along tonight. So we've got 3 of the Eightfold Path. Right conduct, which is, again, not what they're doing in downtown Portland this weekend. Right livelihood, we're really into talking about making money and making more money and having a job. And none of those things are right livelihood. Your right livelihood has to do with how you are in the world, how you feed yourself, how you put a roof over your head, etc. And there are ways of doing that that will get you closer to stopping your suffering. Then there are ways of doing that that will exacerbate your suffering and the suffering of others. So that's one of the things that we have to look at. Right effort, how you are trying to do something. And right mindfulness, the going into something with the correct, for those of us who meditate, and that should be all of us on the call, going into it with the right mental state, the right heart state, etc. Okay. Oh, right samadhi. So all of this gets us to the union with the infinite, the union with the ultimate reality, the union with nirvana. And how you go about that union is part of the Eightfold Path. And you will forgive me as I skate over all these values, because we got a lot further to go here. So Christian values. And it's really interesting. I came up, I started looking at what do I put into this box here. And when I started doing a little research on it, this is the stuff that I came up with. Being of service, being expressing thankfulness, expressing compassion, endurance, especially enduring suffering, being creative, being just, being at peace, being wise. And the question marks are there because it's like, well, who actually does this? I mean, I'm actually thinking of people who think of themselves as committed Christians, and they wouldn't come up with this list. So I'm wondering if there even is a list of those values. When I talk about Christianity being one of my 4 pillars, I think about it in terms of what did Jesus of Nazareth actually talk about? What were his teachings? What did he actually say? Not what did people say he said, okay? And I'm thinking about things like loving your enemies. Really, ultimately, having no enemies, but if you've got them, you have a duty to love them. Now, I would call that a Christian value, but I don't know any Christians who do, okay? So when I talk about this pillar, I talk about the wisdom of Jesus of Nazareth. I don't talk about this in terms of the way Christianity is actually practiced. Now, along that line, though, something that's been coming to me fairly recently is what I'm calling, for want of better language, Christian feminine principles. Okay, so and this would be the counterbalance to a lot of the yangness of how Christianity has been practiced and how women have been pushed to the side in most Christian practices. And the thing that's been driving me along those lines is the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And I've been reading and rereading that to see what Jesus's compliment was saying was the direction that things should go. I could say a lot more about that. There may be a talk that I give only about that because I've been studying about Mary Magdalene a lot lately. I would encourage all of you to get the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. You can type it in your Google and you'll have it. And watch the Mary Magdalene movie. There's a movie called Mary Magdalene. It's been out for a bit. Joaquin Phoenix plays a really credible Jesus. And you get some of the feeling for what would the church have been like if Peter, the ultimate misogynist, had a woman as a counterbalance in how he interpreted what Christianity was after Jesus left the scene. Okay, I thought I was going to get hung up on that one slide a half an hour. It was only a couple of minutes, so let's keep going. Okay, so the 4th pillar is Islam, but Islam in its spiritual sense. So the 5 pillars of Islam, the Islamic praxis includes the Shahada, the profession of the faith, making your prayers every day, giving alms at the alms-giving times, fasting during Ramadan, and making the pilgrimage to Mecca. But there's also another way of looking at Islam. I would call it the spiritual side of Islam or the transcendent side of Islam. And this would be a Sufi praxis. And this is the part that draws me right now. looking at the issue of repentance, sincerity, and I'll just leave the word there. I could go on about half an hour about that. Remembrance, and remembrance is called zikr, and this is a fundamental part of Sufism. Sufism says learning is not important. You already know it. You were born with it. You just need to remember what you were born with. And then love, a transcendent kind of love, a love that where your mind goes away. And a lot of the Sufi praxis is around letting go of your sense of this, your objective sense of this self, and go and transcending to another realm or another level. Okay, and I'm going to go one more step, and then I'm going to take some questions. So you should get some questions ready for me if you have them. And the last step is what I call the gospel according to George Lucas. The Star Wars movies were fun. Were I was, and to a lesser extent now still am a Star Wars fan. But when he was talking about the Force, I really think that he got this new way of thinking about ourselves and our world right. I think that the Force, a lot of it is Taoism, and then blending in Buddhism, Christianity, et cetera, et cetera. And there you go. There's Master Yoda, who said, the Force is an energy field created by all living things. You must feel the Force around you, here between you, me, the tree, the rock, everywhere. Fear, anger, fear, and aggression, the dark side are they. Yoda was not known for his sentence structures. Once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. So even people who thought of themselves as being transcendent in the days of in that galaxy long ago, far, far away, if they were following the dark path, they could have powers, but at a cost. Do or do not. There is no try. Now, that almost transcends every spiritual teaching I know. Of how you are in the world and what you do in the world. You must unlearn what you have learned. And so for so many of us, this is true. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. And if I had enough time and enough Kleenex around me, because it would involve some crying, how the universe in its infinitely perfect timing will require that you step through each and every fear that you've got. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to look for some hands going up to see if there are people who are either wanting to ask a question or make a comment, a tight comment, about what they just saw. And I've got Tiger Stripes, and so I don't have a name here other than Tiger Stripes, and I also don't see if you can unmute yourself, and if you've got a question. I don't see that you have a microphone. So if you may have to write out your question in the chat box.
No, I got a microphone.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay. So what's your question or comment?
The Four Noble Truths. I mean, I think it's all awesome. I've got lots and lots of background in Taoism, so that's great. But what do you think about the corporatization of Buddhism? There's lots of businesses these days that they take their personal responsibility for how they treat their employees and how they treat their working class, and they load that liability onto them. They say your suffering comes from inside you. You need to meditate. You need to do anger management. You need to get counseling, and we'll help you get that instead of actually addressing their own practices, their employment practices, their own workers' practices.
Let me try to be succinct with this. Number one, it happens. Number two, it happens in every single religion that I know of, okay? Which is one of the reasons why I keep saying over and over, this is not about religion. I'm not trying to foster a particular religion or not. This is something that happened during the days of slavery. It's also something that happened during the Reconstruction or the days of American apartheid, where the church basically said to the slaves or the former slaves, as a Christian, you have a duty to be meek and mild and getting your reward in heaven, not here on earth. And we, the masters, have a balancing act, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to do our part, and we're going to be forgiven for all that. So you just go ahead and suffer through this. Every religion I know has some mechanism that allows them to skirt their responsibility. If we were actually listening to our wisdom teachers, if we actually listened to Jesus of Nazareth, if we actually listened to the Buddha, we actually listened to Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu, if we actually listen to Rumi, we would be living in a fundamentally different world. I would have to get a job as a carpenter or a photographer or something, because there'd be no need for what I'm doing. Okay, the fact that regardless of the fact that we've got 33,000 different interpretations, different orders or denominations of Christianity, we still can't practice Christianity. This attempt at moving responsibility to those who are not in a power in a position to enforce that responsibility is something that goes on and on and on. I think we are the ones that have to demonstrate for others what their responsibility actually is. I can't tell you the number of times I've said to someone, I don't call myself a Christian because you do. Because if that's Christianity, I don't want any part of it. Can't tell you the number of times I've said to Muslims, I don't call myself a Muslim because you do. If that's Islam, I don't want any part of it. Okay? And so, so if I get shot at, okay, I'm facing my windows that face the street right now, I won't know who pulled the trigger. Everybody would have their beefs with my beliefs, and it may be that they do that because they don't understand what their own beliefs are. Any other questions or comments right now? I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to do a quick check-in for. So I see either Peter or Trudy have their hand up right now, and if you can unmute yourself, or I think you're asking this. In the chat box where you're saying, What values are common to your four pillars? I think it's a really good question. I started thinking about that today. I haven't had to. I have. Well, I should say I haven't had to. I haven't thought about that because I'm willing to accept all of them and not divide them out. I think that there are two that are common. One of them is what I would call inclusivity. I think that all of our wisdom teachers are trying to get us to recognize that we are in a direct relationship with all other living beings. So that when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, love your enemy, I think he's talking about this overarching principle of inclusivity. The same thing is true, I think, in Buddhism. How Lao Tzu talks about the nature of the way and the highest quality being like water that accepts all. I think that's another statement of inclusivity. So inclusivity, a direct and very meaningful non-violence. You can't be violent with the friend. And in Sufism, they talk about meeting the friend. And I'm not talking about just all of you on this call are my friends. I'm talking about a spiritual relationship with all that is. Okay, so when two of us are meeting, there's a third force that's there, and that third force being the friend. If we have time, I've distilled out of all of the wisdom teachings what I think are 10 universal values, and I'm going to try to get to them if we have time. And you're asking again, when I talk about inclusivity, do I mean interdependence? I think interdependence would is included in inclusivity, but is not it. Okay. So let me talk about two levels of inclusivity. One is what I would consider to be, I don't want to say shallow, but not deep inclusivity. And that is each one of us is inextricably linked to every other being. Okay. Every being that's a human being on this planet, and every other being, including the mosquito you swat around, and all of the beings that you eat. The deeper level of that is, okay, so I recognize there's some beings that I am dependent on, okay? I'm dependent on the broccoli that goes into my dinner. I'm dependent on the fossil fuels that push my car down the street. I have this interdependence. But more than that is the recognition, and this comes out really, really clear in Sufism, that we are one. That there is no duality, that I am one with you, each one of you on the call. I'm one with you, each one of the ones looking at this on a recording. I'm one with you, whether I know you or not, or have seen you or not, whether you have any idea even that America exists as a country, I'm still one with you. I'm one with you to the point that I am you. There's a phrase in, oh God, some language that some language of some country I've been to that says that the greeting is the word. I think it's in Lakek, and it's a Central American term. And what this word means is, I am another you. When I'm greeting you, I'm basically saying hello to myself. Okay, which is really weird because right now on my screen I'm looking at myself. So, hi there, Shariff. But each one of you is a Shariff for me, and each one of you is a Delaney for me, and a David for me, and a Matthew for me, and a Peter and Trudy for me, and a Robin for me, and a Joe for me. Okay, and so, so say one more word about interdependence. Daniel Kemmis, a friend of mine, was also the mayor of Missoula, Montana, at one time. Daniel talked to me about living in eastern Montana. And he said, we relied on our neighbors for everything. He said, we're living in rural Montana. Everything that we had to do with a bunch of people, and we had to do this with our neighbors. And he said, we didn't like our neighbors. They said they drank too much. The kids were too coarse for my mother to want us to play with, etc. But whether or not we liked them, we needed them. And we knew we would not survive. We could die without our neighbors. So right now, right here in Portland, Oregon, I'm in an apartment building where I've got 4 neighbors, and I like all my neighbors. I have really, really great neighbors. They got a really good mix of folks in here. I don't need them for anything. If they were instantly wiped off the face of the earth, I wouldn't miss anything. It wouldn't affect my life at all. And the fact that the ultra right and the ultra left are going to start pounding on each other in Portland, Oregon, in a couple of days, is because they don't need each other. They don't know each other. They have no idea who they're pounding on. Everything they know about each other is coming straight from the television set, or straight from their radio. Or worse than that, straight from the internet. And because we don't know each other anymore, because we don't need each other anymore, because there's no level of interdependence between us, we don't connect. Okay, I'm going to not ask for another show of hands because we may get another question. We're going to go into another section right now, and this involves another sharing. Okay, and I'm hitting the share button and nothing has happened. Oh, there we go. So we're going to talk about how our values are coherent or non-coherent. And to do that, we're going to look at the values pyramid. This is the values pyramid, and that's all your values, and there's all lined up there, as well it should be. This is not the reality that most of us experience, though. What most of us experience is we say our values are one thing. And one of our societal values in this country is represented on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. Give us your tired and your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these. Okay, we memorize this in school. We say that this is one of the values, one of the foundational values of America. And then we get to our values that we actually practice. And the values that we actually practice are send out the Coast Guard to intercept the tired and the poor and the huddled masses yearning to be free, and send them back to their own country. Build a wall on our southern border to keep out the people who are tired and poor and yearning to be free. So you see there's a difference between what we're saying and what we're practicing. And that leads to the largest part of our values pyramid, which are our hidden values. The hidden values, the ones you don't talk about, the ones that you don't write about, are we don't want any more poor people, or we don't want any more dark people coming into our country. Okay, we actually want to get rid of the ones we've got, and that puts our values are stated, the values that we practice, and our hidden values skewed. Okay, this is what it looks like, and what this is a recipe for what I call societal schizophrenia. Now, a friend of mine who works with people who are experiencing mental disorders criticized me for the slides, because she's saying, you know, this is nothing, schizophrenia is nothing to be joked about. It's nothing to be laughed at. There are people who are in great need and great pain who are experiencing societal schizophrenia. And after I thought about it, I actually thought about removing the slide or removing this term. I started realizing, it's like, no, I mean it in all of its clinical reality, that we are, as an entire society, we're missing each other. We're missing ourselves. We've got these issues going on that we just don't have a handle on. And so that's the thing that we need to start looking at, is how do we heal this level of societal imbalance, of being out of balance in terms of our society. Okay, so here I'm going to ask for other questions about our societal values being out of whack. I'm not seeing any hands going up, and so. And this is the part where I start talking slow to give you a chance to think of what your question is. I also take a sip of my iced tea. So we're going to go. I'm making a decision now. Do we go on to our next section or take a small break? We're going to take a very small break right now. And the break will be 5 minutes, and that'll give us enough time to run to the restroom and rest and come back. So I will call us back in a few minutes after the hour. Okay, and I'm going to hit pause. So we're back, and while we were breaking, I thought of something. I don't know why it is, but one of the things that seems to be the most difficult to talk about in this society is our values. I'm looking at the number of people on this call. I'm looking at the number of people who have signed up to get the recording. And it's whenever I talk about values and our transcendent reality, it's generally the lowest number of calls I get, whether I'm charging for it or not. And it shouldn't be that way. And when I say shouldn't, it's like, if we really are going to change the society, we need to look at what the key elements of a society are. And that's what this stuff is. I'm hoping for the day when that picture changes, because if it doesn't change, we're going to wind up recreating all the mess that we've got right now, and we're going to wind up doing that in a way that won't be very pretty. I keep reminding us there are people who have tried to make the world a better place over time, and they wound up killing, murdering tens of millions of people while they're doing it. And so for us to make sure that our values are clear and our values are actually what we're practicing, not some pie in the sky thing we talk about, but practice something different, like the Roman Catholic Church does celibacy. Okay, celibacy is the way you get closer to God. It's also the way you get furthest away from any value that human beings have in this society, in this world. So let me start out talking about the 5 foundational values for Commonway. While I'm doing this, I'm going to encourage you to get a pencil and a piece of paper to write a few things down, because I'm going to be asking you a question that you will take into a breakout session. And we'll talk about breakouts in a minute. And I want you to make sure you have the information, okay? And so without further ado, we're going to share again. And these are the 5 foundational values for Commonway. And those 5 is what I want you to copy down. We'll be going through each one of them one by one, so if you don't get them all copied down right this second, that's okay. So, inclusivity, collective responsibility and empowerment. This is about power. Consciousness and consciousness shift. Authenticity and action. Action as a value. So let's go through that slower. Inclusivity, we've already talked about. The concept of it is that we are inextricably linked to all beings. We are one with all living beings. We are one with all human beings. We are one with all other than human beings. We are one with all living beings who have been here before. We are one with all living beings who are coming here after. We are one with all living beings, regardless of where they may be in the universe, okay? As I believe, inclusivity is the basis of all of our wisdom teachings. It's also the thing that we practice the least of all of our wisdom teachings. It seems to be the thing that gets forgotten about the most. Or if we remember it at all, it's somewhere between December 20th and 26th, where we say, peace on earth, goodwill to all men. We're not sure what the women were doing, but goodwill to all men. And then after we open our presents, we're pretty much done with that for the year. And we only talked about it. We didn't actually try to practice it. Another part of inclusivity is having a commitment to it, to be committed to the practice of it. And this is something that I see happening with people. They will, people who have been working with Commonway, and sometimes for quite a while, will be doing or saying something that is amazingly divisive. It used to be Bush bashing, now it's Trump bashing, okay? I will then say, there's no one part of our political spectrum that is a responsibility for the problem or the solution. And they'll say really quick, oh yeah, that's right. It's all of us who are doing this, all of us are. So they've got the idea and the language. And it's something they actually practice when I'm in the room, okay, when I'm actually looking at them. When I leave the room, they go back to the casual Trump bashing. So this is not a value, or it's not a value that makes up their praxis. It's not something that they are going to articulate and act on, regardless of whether or not I'm in the room. And it needs to be that way. So not only am I making a commitment to the practice of inclusivity, I am inviting everybody else to do so. It's once you start doing it, you'll realize a couple of things. Number one, it ain't easy. Okay, I fall short. I was about to say sometimes, but maybe a lot. But I am constantly picking myself up, and I'm constantly trying to remind myself what my responsibility is. That I've chosen this as a responsibility. And to encourage other people to do that, to encourage other people that this value is something that's actually going to get us to a world that works for all beings. Okay, second of these foundational values is what I call collective responsibility and empowerment, or another way of saying all those words is a value of power, valuing power as a value. This is something that we don't do well in this society. We either want it, or want to stay away from it, without understanding what it is. You cannot have power without responsibility. You can't have responsibility without power. So responsibility is, we have to recognize that the world that we've created, the world we're trying to change, is a world that I created. I created this world. You created this world. You want to blame it on, pick out your whipping boy or whipping girl to beat up on. Corporations, the banksters, the Republicans, and unless you're a Republican, the Democrats. You've got these folks that you are that you can separate yourself from and look at their values. But all of us created this. We all created it by our actions. We also created it by our inactions. And what I mean by that, for those who have like retirement funds or 401k funds or whatever, you have your money invested in a system that supports all the things that you're against. And you're paying for those things while you paint your protest sign and go downtown and hold up your sign during your rally protesting it. The biggest protest the biggest effective change that you could make is to sit down with your investments and make sure none of them are invested in nuclear weapons, war, the toxicity of our planet, etc. You will probably make less money when you do that. So what? This is the part where the Buddhists talk about things like right livelihood, making sure your money comes from the right kind of source. So we create the world through our actions, through our inactions, and letting other people act for us, and by going along with the bad leadership of others. If you're protesting it, you're still going along with it. You can do something else, and that's join with other people and create a whole new society. So the empowerment part is, once I recognize that I created this mess, I co-created this mess, I also then recognize I've got the power to change it. I can pull my energy, my power out of the mess and into effective change. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3 is consciousness or mindfulness. Consciousness implies action. I know lots and lots of people who consider themselves to be spiritual people. And remember, a third of adults in this country during the last census checked the box that said, I'm spiritual but not religious. That's a third of adults. Okay, that's like what, 80 million people. Okay. But if you ask them, what does that mean? Most of them, well, I read some books and once in a while I go on a retreat and then I come back and I live the life that everybody else is living. But our consciousness of these values will create and shape a new world. It will create and shape a transformed world. Once we get clear what our consciousness means, our consciousness, it lies somewhere in our heart and our head. It's not located in any one location. It's not located in either of those locations, which means your consciousness can kind of keep on boogieing after your meat body goes somewhere else. That's a conversation that'll last, a few days. So we get to practice this higher consciousness or practice our mindfulness every single day and in all of our institutions. And if your institution asks you to be unconscious, asks you to cheat people, for example, then you need to get a different institution to be working with. When I was growing up in Camden, New Jersey, I had a part-time job and working in a vegetable and fruit stand. And the first thing that Tony, Tony's Market, the first thing he taught me was how to cheat people. And I was only, 15 or 16, but I was just appalled at the things he was asking me to do. My big job was on Fridays. Everybody ate fish, and everybody came to Tony's because he had fresh fish. And he said, when you pick the fish up, to scoop a handful of ice under the fish, so that when you put the fish on the scale, you're putting several ounces of ice on the scale, so the person's buying the ice along with the fish. If you have a bad looking fish, to make sure you turn it good side up so that they'll buy this bad fish. I could go on. And this is what's called wrong livelihood. If you're being asked to do things that pull your own values into question, or not even in the question. There's no question but that this stuff was not the right thing to do. And so when I was 15 years old in Camden, New Jersey, I didn't have the personal power to call him on this, to say, this is the wrong thing to do, and if you're asking me to do the wrong thing, I'm quitting. Okay. I would have the energy to do that now. I would only do that stuff if he was looking, and I would do the right thing if he was not looking. So our consciousness also means our spirituality. How many times did I say this already? Our spirituality is not about religion. It is about how we live as authentic human beings in the world. It is about how I practice compassion, how I practice forgiveness, how I practice love, how I practice harmony, how I practice sacrifice, how I live my life as a human being, but I live it in a transpersonal way. I live it in a way that I want to receive those qualities from you, and then I want to give those qualities to you. That we transcend our ego once we understand these values. Okay. Authenticity means that I'm going to be in alignment with my values, regardless of what my values are. I tell people around the world, I don't care what your values are, as long as you are practicing them. And as long as it's okay for your other to practice those values on you. You'll know when a person's values are skewed when their value structure is do unto others before they can do it unto you. And so we need to be bringing all that into a sense of connection with ourselves and with each other. So it means that we're aligned with our values. It means that I know what my values are. I can take that value and align it to my behavior, and that I'm consciously aware of my actions, and I'm consciously aware of the consequences of those actions. And I accept the consequences of my actions. If I can't do that, then I'm not true to whatever that value is. And then I have to also remind myself that all this is about action. So authenticity is my values in action. It's one thing for us to think about the values. It's another thing to make the values integral to our lives. Okay, moving right along. And then we get to action, to vision-driven action. We can't be driven by problems. That makes us bitter, it makes us angry, it gets us to be burned out, etc. We have to be driven by the highest goal and the highest vision that we can muster. And for me, that means being driven to create a world that actually works for all beings. This energizes us in ways that talking about the problems de-energizes and demoralizes us. So we're not driven by the problems. We're also not driven by anger. And for those of us who can remember the Occupy phenomena of a few years ago, how much of that was driven by anger, and driven by what I think of as righteous anger. That this society has gone on long enough. And so people came out, and they were holding up their signs, and they got in their tents, etc. But because they didn't have a clear vision of the world that they wanted to create, it fell apart. And it fell apart around anger. So the anger was the people were directing their anger at each other. Okay, their values were less than what the values could have been or should have been in the society at that time. So those are the 5 foundational values for Commonway. I've got a couple of questions for you. The questions are there any values that you would add to that list of foundational values? Question number 2, are there any values that you would remove that you think that this is not a key fundamental or foundational value from that list of 5? I'm going to put the list back up on the screen for a couple more minutes as I talk to you about how we are going to divide into groups. And you will see right now that Delaney's put onto the in the chat those those 2 questions. And I'm going to ask her also to put in the list of the 5 so I can stop sharing and I can get to dividing us into groups. If you've done this before, great. And if you haven't done this, you probably should be paying attention. And that is, we're going to divide into, looks like 2 rooms. Each one of you will have 2 or 3 participants in your room. And what will happen is when I hit the magic button, you will be invited to go into your room. And so right now, I've got 2 people in one room and 3 people in another room. Now, I'm going to ask one of those 3 people, and that person is going to be Matthew. I'm going to ask you when it's time to go into your room for you not to go in, to stay with me. And you and I will have a dialogue on these 2 questions. So that will mean you've got, we'll have 2 and 2 and 2. And what that means for those who are back looking at this on recording is that you'll see people who are actually discussing things on your screen also. If everybody went into a breakout room, you wouldn't see anything on your screen. Okay, so I am going to now open the breakout, open the rooms for you to connect. Unmute yourself, turn your video on, and move into your room. Except for Matthew, you're going to stay with me. We're going to spend, I think, 6 minutes or so on this question, because I have another one for you also, another question for you. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this one. And so I think we're ready. And I'm clicking the magic button. And I think that means you probably can't hear me anymore. And I'm seeing you, Robin, but you should be going into your breakout room. So there should be a button somewhere that says breakout room. And I'm not seeing Matthew. Okay, bye. There
All right, cool. That works.
I can hear you. I don't see you. Then I see you. There we go. This works. Okay, yay!
It's been a while since I had one.
Yeah, indeed. So what do you think about, were there any values that you heard that you thought either should not be included or you would not have included? Or were there values that I did not include that you think should be included?
Cool. Well, I love these all. They're very similar to the values I've been brought up with as a child, and I try to follow in my life. I didn't see anything clearly about learning and personal growth in terms of self-education.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see anything about that. But then I looked through and thought, wait a minute. They're basically, they look very similar to the UU values I follow in my life, and thought this is very similar to what I do. And yeah, I really I tried to do at least.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, I'm in total agreement with everything you said.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote down a few notes, like on the authenticity. I thought, well, basically you're talking utilitarianism.
Mm-hmm.
It's the consequences that matter. And one thing I've been, something over the last year and a half I've started to say is that basically someone's in long-term relationships, the intent of someone's actions will be determined by the outcomes of their actions in a long-term relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And as they find their results are not what they intend, they will change their actions to make it as close to their intentions as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody doesn't do that, they were not authentic in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a hardcore utilitarian, in other words.
Yeah. Well, I am
Mm-hmm.
while I agree with your view of utilitarianism, I'm not
Yeah.
sure it means the same thing as authenticity. Okay.
Okay.
And so let me give you an example of what I think of as authenticity, and see if that pulls things together for you, or for me, for me. So, for example, if I've actually had people say this to me, if a person's in an open, intimate relationship. So they've got an intimate relationship with person A, and they also are having a sexual practice with person B, C, D, E, as far as your alphabet goes. I've heard people say that person is cheating, okay, because being faithful to your partner is an ultimate value. I would say if the person is being honest with person A and saying, oh, by the way, I'm seeing, person B, C, D, E, epsilon, gamma, whoever, kind of keep going, then that person is being authentic. They're being true to their value structure and who they are. If they're saying, as so many of our politicians say, oh, no, I don't do things like that, and they turn right around and do those things, then that's when you are practicing inauthenticity. So I don't know how that relates to the issue of how that relates to your issue of utilitarianism.
Yeah. So you're saying basically what we say and what we preach are the same thing, and that's authenticity. Basically. And
no, well, I don't. I'm not sure I just said that. I think I said being honest with what you're saying and what you're preaching is authenticity. Okay, being true. So if I never said I won't drink alcohol, and then you see me drinking alcohol, it's like I never said I was. When I say alcohol will never touch my lips, and then you see you in the corner going, then that is inauthenticity. And something, this is really interesting, but I said 6 minutes, so I think we got another minute or so. Let me give them their 1 minute warning.
So you're talking more honesty. That's what you're really referring to.
I'm really talking about being honest, being true to who you are, and in a society that does not practice this, I think it's really, really important. Anywho, so I'm calling the crew back in, and they will be showing up in 51 seconds, so we can talk a little bit longer. So this, these notions are fairly universal, and I although, you know, there are some people who say, well, what about sustainability as a value? And I'm like, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
No, I believe in sustainability as a value, but I'm not sure it is as fundamental as these that we're going through right now. Maybe the conversation on the other rooms was really good because people are not coming. They're going to be forced back in about 5 seconds here. But yeah,
There we go.
so here we go. Okay.
I thought on the sustainability one.
Yeah. So I am going to ask if what was said in your other sessions before you disappear yourselves. What was said in your other sessions that was meaningful for you? Did you hear something? Did you say something that you got? And Matthew and I will say this. Everybody is sitting there stunned. Matthew and I were talking about some possible additions to the list, including the value of self-education or expanding one's own awareness that could be incorporated into the notion of consciousness, but maybe not. And we spent some time looking at utilitarianism and authenticity. Does this mean the same thing? Is this, how does this work? So your other folks want to chime in. Delaney?
So I was in a breakout room with David, and at the end I was talking about authenticity. And so I was seeing that your definition of authenticity is different from mine, because, like, me, I've studied psychology and I've worked with a lot of different people. So when I think of authenticity, I think of emotional authenticity. I think of intimacy and sharing your emotional states with other beings. And I know there's a time and place for that. Like, if you're at a work thing, you might not want to share like what's going on in your personal life. But I do feel like that is like part of our humanity, and it's part of connecting with others, is knowing where they're at and how they're feeling. And so that's something I do practice, is authenticity. If somebody asks me how I'm feeling, I'm going to tell them how I'm feeling. I'm not going to be fake and say, oh, I'm fine. We were talking about that earlier. Sometimes I will, if I don't know that person or don't have a trusting relationship with them, or it's not relevant, I'll put on that, say I'm fine. But for those more personal relationships, I want to actually share what's going on in me.
Yeah. No, and there are times when I actually will say to someone, which answer do you want? And that actually was a very powerful moment for me when I was I was doing a class at the McLaren Reform School here in Oregon. And it went really well, and I had a chance to talk to some of the young men who were incarcerated there. And one guy was very articulate in the class. I mean, you could tell he was going to go somewhere. If he was going to go back to his criminal life, he was going to become a master criminal. Like, he was going to be a really good one, and hopefully he's going to do something else. And I said, so what's your plan when are you getting out? He said 6 months or 9 months or something like that. I said, what are your plans when you getting out? And he hesitated and he said, which answer do you want? And I was like, this is going to be interesting. I said, why don't you give me both of them? And so he said, the answer that most adults want is that I'm going to go to college and that I'm going to study law or medicine or something like that, and I'm going to get a degree and I'm going to raise a family, etc. And he says, I say that because that's what most adults want to hear. But if you want the truth, he says, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know what I want to do, And I told him, I said, number one, that's the answer that I want, because that's what's true to you right now. And number two, that is actually the most powerful place you can be, because you're open to all options. You're open to seeing just, what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. Okay, folks, we're having too much fun here. Was there another room?
I've seen there's some comments from P&T Johnson.
Okay. Yeah, well, yes. To me, when I talk about inclusivity, I'm talking about all human beings, all living beings, and the earth herself as a living being. We're like the fleas on a dog. Okay, I mean, we don't get overly saturated with ourselves. Okay, like have some humility about our role. We're not the greatest thing on earth unless unless the dog has so many fleas it would kill it, in which case the dog should shake it off and start over again. And Gaia can, so we should be very, very happy and very respectful all the time. But yeah, the earth is definitely a value, and valuing beings, valuing living beings we can't see, hear, touch, taste, etc. Valuing the living that are in the transcendent. This, not to have this kind of meat-derived view of what life is. And if you want to do a segment on life, we could go for a couple of months on that. Folks, I'm going to ask you to resume your silence and no video, because we're going to do another 2 sections really quickly. And I'm going to give you, as I said earlier to one of the earlier questions, I think that there is a set of universal values. And I'm going to share that with you right now. And this is my work, and this is what I've gotten from looking at all of the major wisdom traditions. I've read as I said in one of the earlier videos, I've read everybody's holy book. I have practiced, I mean, like been in the church, the mosque, the temple, the Coville, the synagogue, you name it, I've been practicing actually with people. And this is the list that I have come up with. Number 1, love as our major value. And I'm actually thinking about adding that to the list of 5 and making it a list of 6. That of creating a society based on love, but not love like, ooh, baby, I love you, but love in the sense of loving kindness, of having our heart open to love to all beings that we connect with. Number 2 is the concept of peace, or ahimsa, or nonviolence, or drala, or contentment. To be a peaceful person living a peaceful life. That's one, having been raised in Camden, I have to actively work on. The concept of drala is from Tibetan Buddhism, and that means being above your enemy. But above not in an ego sense, but so far above the enemy that that person's not an enemy anymore, because they can't possibly hurt you, okay? Even if they hurt your physical body, they can't hurt you, the essence of who you are. I remember Gandhi saying at some point in time, if you kill me, you have my dead body, you don't have my obedience. And this is quick story around the concept of drala. I was at Sarvodia doing my work in the cafeteria at lunchtime. Several hundred people milling around. People from all of Sarvodia, all of Sri Lanka's walks of life. So there are Tamils there are Muslims there are Sinhalese there. And this kid walks up to me, say maybe 4 or 5 years old, not with a parent, and he taps me on the leg and he says something to me in one of the languages. I don't know either of the languages, so I can't help the kid. I have no idea what the kid said. So I leaned over to him and said, I don't know what you just said. I'm going to find somebody who does. And so I put my hand on his shoulder to let him know I wasn't ignoring him. I started looking around the room for someone who spoke both that I knew spoke both languages. So as I'm looking around the room, he taps me on the leg again, and he says this sentence again. And I leaned over again and said, look, I really want to help you, but I don't speak your language, whatever it may be. So finally I spied someone that I knew spoke Sinhalese and Tamil. I motioned her to come over. And I said, you need to talk to this kid for me. And she talked to them, and the kid said something, and she starts to go off with the kid. The kid turns around and punches me in the leg, like, you big dummy. why didn't you help me? Like, pow, Now, the kid is like I said, somewhere around 4 or 5 years old. He could not hurt me, okay? Actually, he punched me in the leg, so he couldn't hurt me, okay? He was frustrated, and that's how he did his frustration. And so I thought this was both funny and a little sad. I really wish I could have been more helpful to the kid, but I didn't get angry. I didn't punch him back, okay? And not punching him back was my practice of drala. I was so far above him in age, in size, in maturity, etc. How in the world could I we had no contention. We weren't contending with each other. This is the attitude right now, by the way, that the United States should have with North Korea. North Korea could not hurt the United States by any stretch of anybody's imagination. We should be ignoring Kim Jong, whoever. We should be practicing compassion with that person. I think that we get a lot further with compassion than military drills and saber rattling, etc. But starting off in the recognition that regardless of what he does, he's not going to hurt us. Okay. Okay. Continuing on, we got down to our last few minutes now. Compassion, service, dana, the notion of caring for others. Forgiveness, tolerance, karma. And there's a number of people who have questioned me putting karma at that spot, but you can question the entire list. Patience, humility, surrender as another set of values. Practicing the golden rule, practicing inclusivity, practicing equanimity as a set of values. Righteousness, dharma, truth, Tao, authenticity, purity, goodness, that this notion that appears in almost every wisdom tradition, that there is, I think this is in Confucianism, the pure land, the place where everything works. I think this maybe have been one of the Platonic ideals. It just shows up in so many different cultures and countries. And so I think that is, again, a universal, questing for a universal value. And you might say a world that works for all is in that mode. It's this thing that we will strive for. The question is whether we will ever get there through our striving. Number 8 is joy, gratitude, acknowledgement, fulfillment, happiness. Again, all of these are values that can be considered universal values. Number 9, responsibility, empowerment, or action. Remember that one of the 8 noble pathways in Buddhism was right action, of being able to take action, aware of the consequences, aware of what's going on, doing it for the sake of self and others, etc. And finally, something that appears in every single wisdom tradition I've ever come across is this notion of awakened consciousness. Of having more than the everyday, I got to catch my bus, I got to go to work, I'm going to punch out, I'm going to watch a TV show. Having more than that as our consciousness, and to have this larger or expanded state as our goal, as one of our values. Okay, so I'm going to, this is a great time to ask some other questions. If I introduce the last segment, we will not be able to take any questions on it, which means there's a part of me I kind of just don't want to throw it out there, but I think that to be complete, we need to throw it out there, even if we go a few minutes longer than 9 o'clock. So let me ask if there are any questions about the universal values list. I will make that as a slide, and I'm saying this for you, and I'm also saying it for the people who are recording, who are on the recording. I'll make that as a slide so that when I send out the PDF file that has the slides on it, you'll have that too. Okay, so what are your thoughts or wishes with regard to this? I am not seeing hands going up right now, so perhaps what this means is you are not going to ask any questions, and we're going to get into my last segment. Okay, going once, going twice. Time for me to do another share here. Okay. So we can see this relationship between consciousness, values, and your praxis, your practice that is infused with your consciousness, your practice that is infused with your values, and all of that being where and how you take your action. And so action is reflecting your consciousness. Your actions reflect your values. Your actions reflect your praxis, and vice versa. Okay. So where would you learn about this stuff? Well, not at your average university. You're not learning it in church. Remember I said when I started thinking about Christian values, I couldn't pull any up that weren't keyed to a particular denomination, a particular part of Christianity. Not in your community, not in your corporations, okay? And so all of them teach what I call status quoism. So that makes those of us who have made a commitment to doing these values this way, the institution of the future. And the institution of the future being teaching transformationalism and not status quoism. Okay, so that gets us to our last segment. For those of you who knew of oh shoot, what's his name? The guy who wrote the book Ishmael, Daniel Quinn. If you've read Ishmael, good. If you haven't read Ishmael, I actually recommend it. For some reason, Daniel Quinn was one of the people who hated my book, hated Creating a World That Works for All. I don't know why I pissed him off, but I liked all his. And in one of his books, he talks about something he calls the coin of the realm. And what he means by that is, he said that the revolution, what I call the transformation, is going to have some elements to it. Number one, it won't take place all at once. It will be achieved incrementally. Everybody's going to feed everybody else's ideas of how to do this. It will be led by no one. And this is one I put in red because how we look at this determines whether or not this revolution or this transformation will be successful. It will be led by no one means, like he says here, there's nobody at the top that says, you will all do what I say. We don't have not a Stalin or a Chairman Mao or a Chairman Trump or any one person. However, many of us have taken that to mean no one has anything to say about this revolution or this transformation. I don't think that we will have an action leader telling people, you do this, you do that, you do that. No one has the vision to be able to tell individuals how to do this. But I think we desperately need, I guess I'd call them cheerleaders, of somebody on the sidelines with the pom-pom saying, go team, go. And by the way, you're a team. And by the way, the goal line's that way. We need people who are going to actually act like they are that it's important for people to be inspired. Okay, that's different from being led. And I would like to think of myself as both an inspirer and an informer, although there is no one in this country I can tell what to do. Actually, there's no one in any country that I can tell what to do. It's really hard to tell myself what to do. Okay, so number 4, it will not be the initiative of any political, governmental, or religious body. Well, Daniel and I are quite in agreement on that. It will have no targeted endpoint. You'll know when we're in it, but at what point will we actually say, okay, right now we have a world that works for all? It will proceed according to no plan. Okay, so there's not going to be this really, really big book, that says, okay, on page 537, then we get rid of all the nation states, so let's start getting rid of them. Okay, but I think that there will be an overarching, and we talked about this in the vision section, an overarching vision, and that vision will be the plan that drives our hearts and then our actions in the world. And then the final one is, it will reward those who further the revolution with the coin of the revolution. And I started thinking, what the hell does that mean? Okay. Like I said, that up until the time that he told me he hated my book, we were friends. And so Daniel was in town, and we were having breakfast or something. And I said, I've got a real problem with not a problem, I just don't understand what you meant by your number 7. Now, what does it mean to get paid by the coin of the realm? Okay. And he said, I don't know, you figure that out, and Like, so I tried figuring it out. And I started doing workshops where I would ask this as a question. And if we had enough time tonight, I would ask you in your breakout sessions at that question. What is the way that we are going to be paid in a society where money has been put at its true value as a medium of exchange and not as a good in and of itself? So that I can't look at a person and look at how much money they have in the bank and say, this person is a really good person because they've got $5 billion as opposed to this other person who has only $2 million. And of course, this person who's homeless has no value at all because they have no money. So I started asking people that question. I was going to ask you, how is it that in this new society you would accept being paid? I added them all together, and actually I prioritized them. I prioritized them according to the number of times the number of groups said this thing. And this is the list. And so again, let's assume that we had 5 minutes or 10 minutes to, chat about this yourselves, and you come up with your own list, then you could see how your list fits into this. So this is what people came up with. Number one on everybody's list was having more time, having more quality time, spending less time doing something that just made money, less time in busy work, washing the clothes and washing the car and washing anything else that needs to get washed, but more time, period. So there's a book that I read some time ago called Time and the Art of Living. And this guy just wrote about his relationship with time. And he started off by saying, he was a professor, and he borrowed a whole bunch of money so he could take a year off from his teaching job. He said, ostensibly, I borrowed the money to take the year off so me and my family could go to Greece and I could write the book about Greek philosophy or something. He said, but that wasn't the reason at all. He said, I borrowed this money to give myself more time. And that is something that, first of all, I'm feeling a lot of nowadays. I feel pretty much under the gun with regard to time. This was everybody's top priority. Going through the rest of them, having a quality of life, a particular quality of life, having a sense of aliveness, meaning, identity, being paid in how you are developing yourself as a person. The one that caught everybody's attention was number 13, juiciness in life, that you get rewarded by having a life that has a lot more juice in it than what our lives have. Transcendence being a way to get paid. Number 20 was kind of troubling for me because love came out number 20. And but I think that if you're living a particular life, that love can be always present. Excuse me. If you're not living a particular life, then maybe it becomes irrelevant. Anyway, so this is the list of how in the future people want to be paid in the coin of the realm. One quick story, and then we're going to unlimber our videos. I'll ask for another round of questions, but we're gonna wrap up tonight. Oh shoot, I had another. Oh yeah, so the I met Tom of Tom's of Maine. The start off with toothpaste, but basically health and beauty aids now. Who was in Portland doing some tour, and when we were talking, he was saying how he had he wanted to reward his workers, and he thought about how can I tell them that I appreciate them. So he had this really elaborate plan, and whole room full of lawyer monkeys working on 401k plans that were tied to the productivity of a particular unit, etc. And people were at the very best lackluster about it. Okay, at the very best they were kind of indifferent from it. What they were really excited about was if your unit met its monthly goals, your unit got to take off half an hour, and Tom's plant is located on a lake in New England, and you and your manager and all the people on your unit got a chance to put your coats on and walk around the lake, which took about 20 minutes or so, and talk about nothing. Talk about the trees and the birds, etc. And that was people started working harder just so they could get their quota done, so they could take the walk around the lake. This is what things like greater time means. This is what things like belongingness, more community. You start. It feeds you. It gives you a common sense, a common bond. Another thing that they did was, if you met your goals, they created these workstations where there was fresh fruit and little candy snacks and things like that. And you got the bowl at your station, and everybody just thought this was the best thing in the world. And so Tom was saying, considering how much money he paid for lawyers, he said, fruit for the year didn't cost as much as one of the lawyers' hourly salaries. Okay, the taking the time off to walk around the lake cost nothing, and each one of these things drives up the quality of life and the quality of working for Tom's. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here. So other questions or comments? We went a few minutes over. I'm not seeing any. That means that you're all good and tired right now. I am. And so let's, everybody can unmute yourselves and turn your video on. And we can do our goodbyes face-to-face here, at least in 2 dimensions. I don't think, David, I don't know if you've got video or not, or can get there. But thank you for participating in the series. I will get the video up online as soon as I possibly can. This has been really good, and I am really looking forward to doing the Essentials of Transformation webinar series over the course of the next 6 months. I don't know if you've noticed in the stuff I sent out, some of you have said that, coming up with $575, soon to be $650 when we get out of early bird, is a bit of a stretch. You can become a member of Commonway at $30 to $75 a month, and you get access to it. Okay, so I'm trying to get it so that people can feel good about signing up. We got some, but we need more, and that will. So look forward to seeing you appear on that list. Thank you. And I really appreciate you. I appreciate what we have done together here. And I appreciate our next steps here. So thank you and bye.
Boy.
Bye, everyone.
Yep. See you.
Bye.
Yeah.